What is wrong with the Atelier series, or more specifically, what is wrong with how Koei treats the series on Nintendo Switch? You have to admit, the series has come a long way from obscure Japanese-only item-mixing games into borderline mainstream JRPGs. It is a transformation that any budding alchemist would be proud of. With Atelier Resleriana just released and the upcoming Ryza DX releases, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at Koei's indecisive nature regarding the physical releases on Nintendo Switch. They are all over the place. Atelier's adventure on the Switch began quite early on in 2018 with the release of Atelier Lydie Suelle, The Alchemist and the Mysterious Paintings. This received a Western physical release at retail. This was a nice entry point. It was the first one I played personally and I really enjoyed it. I mean, all the games are easy to recommend for JRPG fans, and this game is quite cheap now, but you may want to hold off on purchasing this one since it is available in a bundle that I'll talk about later on. In the summer of 2018, Japan got the Arland Trilogy of games, individually released on the same day: Atelier Miruru, Atelier Rorona, and Atelier Totori. These were the three games within the same story arc. They did get a Western digital release, but in terms of the physical, there is no option to have English anywhere, and it is a big gaping hole in many people's Atelier dreams, especially considering what came later. Nelke and the legendary Alchemist, Ateliers of the New World, is a bit of a sidestep for the series. It is not a mainline game, it is more of a town building management style thing. There are some JRPG battles here, but they're very basic and automated when compared to other entries. At one point, the physical release for this was mildly rare, however VGP did reprint it. However, as I'm making this, that reprint only has like 4 copies left or something, so yeah. In the spring of 2019, Atelier Lulua, the Scion of Arland, was released physically in all regions. I haven't actually played this one. This came out when all the focus was on Ryza, which was coming out later that same year. This is the 4th game in the Arland saga, but the only one the West got physically on the Switch. Atelier Ryza, Ever Darkness and the Secret Hideout would release a few months later and would change the franchise forever, propelling the game into almost mainstream appeal. It was a big hit in all regions and brought in a lovable cast of characters with gorgeous visuals and personality. It still retained what made the series so unique, but it did feel like a big step forward. And at this point, the Atelier machine was in full motion because at the end of the same year, there was something called the Atelier Dusk Trilogy released on the Switch. All 3 games in this trilogy were released on the same day. They were PS3 games ported to the newer generation in their DX form, meaning more content, gameplay tweaks, DLC included as well, basically the definitive editions of the games that came out the previous generation. These 3 games are Atelier Aisha, Escher and Logi, and then Atelier Shaley. Sadly, despite the success of Ryza, in the West, Koei Tecmo let these languish on the eShop. They did get individual physical releases in Japan, but they did not have English. However, this would start a trend where Southeast Asia would come to the rescue of many an English speaker. Because in Southeast Asia, in Singapore, they got a 3-in-1 cartridge pack of these DX games, and they were the English versions. All 3 games on 1 cartridge in English. Thank you, Singapore. It's called the Dusk Trilogy Deluxe Pack, and this has proved to be one of the most popular imports of all time, and that's despite the big price tag, but you get what you pay for. And by the way, if you want this physical release or any of the other games that are still readily available that are mentioned in this video, then you can grab them via the links below in the description and pinned comment. I've linked to the correct ones so you don't accidentally buy like the Japanese only version, and if you purchase from Play Asia, you can get 5% off if you click my link and use the code Jordan2025. And also VGP, they have free worldwide shipping on orders over 75 Canadian bucks, which is about 54 American dollars. And any purchase made helps support me in the best way possible. Thank you ever so much. By the time we got back to a brand new mainline game in 2020 or 21 with Atelier Ryza 2, Koei still had faith in the West, and that is kind of understandable. Again, it was a big hit, even more so than the first game, which grew through word of mouth mostly. But even after that success, they would retreat again back to Asia, because a few months after Ryza 2's Western release, Japan and Asia would get another trilogy of older games, the Mysterious Trilogy. Again, Japan got individual physical releases of Atelier Series, Atelier Sophie, and Lydie Suelle in their DX versions, which you may be familiar with that latter one if you paid attention like 2 minutes ago. Lydie Suelle was the very first Atelier game on the Switch physically, so this is its second release. Now, these Japanese releases do not have English once again, but Southeast Asia came to the rescue because there was a 3-in-1 cartridge of these 3 games, which included the English versions. And as I said, they are the DX versions, so they include all the DLC, which makes it the best way to get Lydie Suelle. It's updated to have better graphics, performance, and content. Like the Dusk trilogy, this Mysterious trilogy is an extremely popular import. Not as much as Dusk, but still popular despite the high price. And this package was a good lead-in to the next mainline game because, rather randomly, Koei decided to give a sequel to Atelier Sophie. We got Atelier Sophie 2, The Alchemist of the Mysterious Dream in 2022. I know this is a very popular entry amongst Atelier fans. Personally, I liked it, but I don't remember that much about it these days since it didn't stick long in my memory. As this was a new mainline game, Koei continued the trend of this getting a Western physical release. A year later, Atelier fans around the world would be feasting with the release of Ryza 3, the end of her trilogy, at least so far. I'm sure if Koei needed extra cash, they could whip up a fourth somehow. But again, the second consecutive Western physical release. Very nice. And it's worth noting that if you don't have these Ryza games yet, you're gonna wanna hold off, okay? Don't buy them right now because there is something you'll definitely want in their stead. That is at the end of this video though. But before I get ahead of myself, later, the same year, in 2023 in the summer, the very first Atelier game was given a remake. Atelier Marie was a PlayStation 1 game that never saw a release outside of Japan, despite all the ports to half a dozen consoles over the years. However, this remake did, but only digitally. Yes, another victim of Koei not trusting anything that wasn't a new mainline game in the West. Even the Japanese physical release of this did not have English, but once again, we can thank Southeast Asia because they did get a physical release in English. And this is old school Atelier. While it did update some aspects of the gameplay, it's still rooted more in the alchemy side of things rather than JRPG battling. Yeah, it still has that, but it's much less of a focus. This really is about becoming a professional alchemist in the fastest time possible. Very interesting release. It wasn't so popular as an import, probably due to the high price compared to the simple production values that it offered, but let's just say the cover art has a few assets that personally make me think it's worth it. It was up to this point that the release behavior was quite predictable. The new mainline games would get a physical release in the West on Switch, while the ports and remakes would not. We would have to rely on Southeast Asia to give us a physical release playable in English. Well, except the Arland trilogy, which I'm still bitter about. However, from now on, things would get worrying for us in the West over the next couple of releases. The next brand new Atelier game came out in 2025, yes, this year. Earlier this year, there was the release of Atelier Yumia, a bold step in taking the franchise to more mainstream levels. Open world, real-time battles, they really tried to evolve the series past its wholesome roots. The physical release, however, well, this is when things got weird, because the game did get a physical release in the West, but only in North America. There was no European physical release on Nintendo Switch, which is weird. I know the game didn't perform super well on the Switch's hardware, and maybe Koei knew that and didn't fancy as much backlash as they could have got, but still, it is the first new mainline game in the series that didn't get a complete Western physical release. So this ended up being a mildly popular import for Europeans who wanted to keep their Atelier collection nice and complete. Very, very recently, last week in fact, we had another mainline Atelier game. Atelier Resleriana, the Red Alchemist, and the White Guardian. While it shares a similar name to the mobile gacha game, this is a proper mainline JRPG. And in fact, it's Koei regressing into more familiar territory, at least compared to the overly ambitious Yumia. It's a bit of a treat for older Atelier fans. However, the physical release is very worrying because despite being a brand new mainline entry, there is no Western physical release on Nintendo Switch at all. Yeah, the PS5 got a retail release in the West, but not on Switch, which is very disappointing because it's such a good game. However, once again, Southeast Asia has come to the rescue with an English physical release, which I anticipate will be one of the biggest imports of this year. I'll probably do a top 10 in December, but not before the next upcoming Atelier game that we know of. It's not without controversy though, because in November, we will be getting the Atelier Ryza DX Trilogy. Yeah, even though all three Ryza games are on the Switch already, they are releasing in DX versions, which will include new playable characters, new storylines, more quality of life improvements, and all of the previous DLC, all of it together. Sadly, there is no upgrade path if you already own the base versions. If you want these DX versions, you'll have to buy it again. Once again, there is no Western physical release, not even on PlayStation 5 this time, which I kind of understand. I think Koei in the West, they are slightly more sensitive to controversy, and let's face it, of all the Atelier games, this is the most controversial. It's a bit dodgy and also potentially confusing for consumers. We're dumb Westerners, what do we know? However, on Switch, you can get a triple pack in English, yes, you guessed it, from Southeast Asia. This, despite the controversy, is going to be a popular import. Even if you despise the idea, you can't say no to the thighs, it's impossible. You're getting 3 massive JRPGs in one package for a really decent price. Okay, it's like $90, $100, but looking back at the individual Ryza releases and the rarity they've had over the years, this is the cheapest way to get them, and they are the best versions of them. So, let's take a look at the overall picture. 8 Atelier physicals are available in the West on Nintendo Switch, or 7 if you live in Europe. Atelier Lydie Suelle, Nelke, even though that's a spin-off and not a proper one, but we'll count it, Atelier Lulua, Ryza 1, 2, and 3, Atelier Sophie 2, and Atelier Yumia. 5 physicals are available in English exclusively via importing them from Southeast Asia. These are the Atelier Dusk Trilogy, the Mysterious Trilogy, Marie Remake, Resleriana, and the upcoming Ryza DX Trilogy. If you count the individual games included in these packages, that is 11 games, more than in the West. That is crazy. And sadly, 3 games, Atelier Miruru, Rorona, and Totori, are the only ones that stayed in Japan and never got an English physical release on Nintendo Switch, not even in Southeast Asia. So yeah, how messed up is that for the Switch? It's like there's 2 people at Koei who keep fighting about how well to support the series in the West. But you know, there's some like Giga Chads sitting there in their Singapore office, smoking a cigar, knowing exactly what a legend he or she is. Thank you, Singapore, for pretty much saving this franchise for us physical collectors. If you want to purchase any of these games, then please do so via the links in the description and pinned comment. That really does help support me in this channel in the best way possible. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you found this video useful and you're new here, then, subscribe. That would be awesome, and you won't regret it. Well, your wallet might regret it, but your happiness will increase, so it's fine. And most of all, I hope you all having a fantastic day. Take care.